Dick Potter and Gary Demers have worked diligently in the basement of the Academy building and putting in the steel beams, again, another donation. So that work is almost completed, and then we'll begin upstairs in the construction, the restoration of the first floor. So we just keep our fingers crossed. Maybe by 2018, we can occupy the building. Let's just hope so. Everything seems to be working very well. But if you haven't seen it, drive by and take a look-see, because it looks beautiful. And so many people have commented, "What did you do? It looks fabulous," including Mayor Dumas. I called him when it was completed, and he went up and he drove around the parking lot 3 times, called me back and said, "It is such a classic job." He said, "It looks fantastic." Proud. Of course, the city owns it, but we do lease it, and it was because of us that it got painted. I just want to say that about 3 weeks, this is my show and tell, or this is my tell. 3 weeks ago, I was called by the Attleboro School Department and asked if I, being a retired school teacher, also being from the Historical Society, would I take new teachers to Attleboro? Some of the teachers were not just new to the system, but also had transferred from one building or one grade or whatever. So would I take them on a bus tour? Previously, I've done that. I've taken them on a bus tour to all the various schools. But this year, they didn't want that. They wanted history. So I planned 3 landmark stations. We started on the bus from Attleboro High School. We left, we parked behind the library and got off the bus, walked the walk, crossed over the bridge there, and walked into the library where Joan Pilkington Smith, the director, met us. She actually gave all the teachers, all of those that came into the library, the ABC Read book. And then I explained to the teachers what a wonderful place the library is. It's not just the Attleboro Public Library, the old library. It's the new library today. And all the programs that Joan has initiated and the children's programs that are available, so teachers, make sure you take advantage of it. From there, we walked around the front of the building and went to the Literacy Center, which was the first mayor's house. And then I also pointed out, oh, that's the James Sullivan Courthouse. You don't want to go there, so be careful. Then we came back, crossed over, went into the YMCA, because many of them wanted to know about programs there, which the Attleboro YMCA has, again, initiated many new programs, wellness programs, not just programs for seniors or citizens of Attleboro, but it's just the new Y, let's say. Then I just had them stand in the parking lot and look at that beautiful Academy building, a former school, and I was pleased to give them a little history. From there, our bus had moved down to City Hall. This was going to be Station 2. So we walked to the great metropolis of Attleboro. But that's when I explained to the teachers and to the other teachers that it's the changing face of Attleboro. We all know that the storefronts and the stores that we were all familiar with in the good old days, I'll say, have gone, but more are coming in. So as we walked and got near the Second Congregational Church, I explained where the Second Congo Church was the second church, where the first church in the Attleboro community was the Old Town Church, the first Congregational Church there. But the Second Congo Church, again, was used as a meeting place during the days of Attleboro settlement. From there, we walked to the Common, pointed out the Common, and as they looked across, I pointed out restaurants, the new pub, Chinese restaurant on the side, and then we proceeded to go to City Hall and pointed out the K. Shang building, of course, being the post office, the old post office. From there, I pointed out the Attleboro Museum and the wonderful exhibits and all that's going on in the Attleboro Museum. Then we went into City Hall and just walked through, naming the departments that are available and so forth, and the personnel office where they will get their check and so forth. And then we went back out into the parking lot, pointing out the Attleboro Police Station, and I said, and if you look through, you'll see the Attleboro Industrial Museum. We have 2 museums in Attleboro. Take advantage of them. Go to the programs and come to the Attleboro Industrial Museum where the Historic Society meets once a month. From there, we got back on the bus and we headed to Capron Park, the 3rd station, Attleboro's treasure, the park. But before we got to the park, our bus driver said, I'll drive through the Robbins Riverfront Park and the transportation center, so we were able to drive through the park. If you have not been there, you really need to either come in the Olive Street entrance or come from Wall Street, thank you. And so we did that, and it is beautiful. It was a beautiful day to begin with, but there are benches there, there's picnic tables, so you can park there and then go for a walk or just enjoy the setting itself. Very pleased. And from there we went to Capron Park, and I explained all about the zoo and what's happening there in the programs, and then they could walk back to the high school where they were having their lunch. So that was a memorable day for me as well. And I said to them as they got off the bus, I handed them what's our guidebook for the historic site guide. And they were happy to have anything that was free. And from there, they would go on. But it was a memory for me because I've done it before, but also because I'm very proud of Attleboro. So that's my spiel. We'll begin, and Evelyn wants to be first, so we'll let her, right? We'll allow her to be first.
Since the academy is where we all started, that's why I want to start there tonight. On the slide here, we have the academy, then we have Attleboro High School, which was at the corner of Bank and Peck Street, then the next high school, which was on County Street, and that was in 1914. And then we have the one that's on Rathbun Willard Drive. I want you to see from whence we came, because we're talking about a new high school that'll be like $283 million. The academy cost $1,600.
Wow. What a difference, huh?
When we get inside the academy, which you haven't been lucky enough to do yet, but one Saturday in the winter a couple of years ago, I got a telephone call. Ev, you gotta come up here. It was Gary Demers, and when I got there, this is what he found. Behind the knotty pine and the plasterboard and all the things, we found wallpaper. And this is the wallpaper. And it had a chair rail, and you see it's colored. And the next one, if you will. So it's pretty colors, rich looking, and that was not an ordinary kind of thing. In those days, they did put wallpaper on the school buildings. Can you see the fiber lines in that? I don't know whether it shows, but it's just interesting to see how you can really see how that wallpaper was made. All right, next one, if you will, please. All right, this A few days later, I get another telephone call. You've got to get up here. You've got to get up here. So I went chasing up with my little throwaway camera, and there they were looking. And up at the ceiling, there was wallpaper on the ceiling also. Now that doesn't look very colorful, but it's old. It's been around. Are there any other pictures of that? Not very colorful, but you see the lower right, you can see that there was a pattern. And it was not my first experience with wallpaper in a school, because I had taught in Westwood, and they had a school that was the same era as our academy, and they had wallpaper. They, being a wealthy town, when they found pieces of wallpaper, they took it to a wallpaper manufacturer, and they had it made. So we haven't done that. Not yet, anyway. But you can see that it was rather pretty. All right. Is that the end of those? I think so.
I'm out of my realm right here, but anyway, my name is Marty Briggs, and my grandparents ran the Briggs Hotel for a number of years. And the only picture I've ever seen of the Briggs Hotel was this postcard. Although that was when they first started. It was called the Briggs House then. It wasn't the Briggs Hotel, it was the Briggs House. There's different views of it. And that was the only picture I had ever seen of the Briggs Hotel, until I found some boxes that my grandfather had. And what a beautiful building it was, you know, all the detail on it, and it wasn't brown. This looks like a prison to me. And it was a beautiful building. There's two views of it.
Is that the building across from,
Yeah, the rundown, yeah. So I just wanted to bring that and show you, because it was a beautiful building in its day. It was I don't know when that front was put on. It's somewhere around 1908, I think, and 1905. If you look at the postcard, there's an addition on the side here. That wasn't original to it either. I don't know when that went on. I'm hoping, as I go through stuff to my grandfather's, that I'll be able to find this out. In the meantime, it's a mystery to me, so I'm hoping I can solve it someday. And I have a book over there of all different things from the hotel, if anybody's interested after. Okay? Thank you.
what year was the hotel in operation?
It was started in 1883. My great-grandparents started in 1883. And it ran till, I think, 1928. They changed it into apartments. My grandfather ran it for a number of years before he went into in South Attleboro Church. He was a minister at the Bethany Church in South Attleboro. But anyway.
Marty?
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
I read someplace where Attleboro High School at one time had a room in the hotel.
That I don't know. I do know that the Capron house that was part of the hotel at one time. And there was a house across the street, the Pinkham House. There was also, I've got a picture of it in a book there. Like I say, there's a lot. That was also used as a hotel.
I didn't know what kind of show and tell it was going to be, so anyway. Well, basically on the left-hand side is, it's an Indian cutting tool that was found in my backyard, which is right off of South Main Street over by Ciabras. And I know along the 10 Mile River and all that, you know, the Indians used to be along there. So one of my sons found that in the backyard when I was digging up the garden. That's the one thing I have. And then the second one is from the Carboniferous era, and it's a piece of shale that was one piece. And when my son was on his paper route, I don't know, about 40 plus years ago, they were digging up the sidewalk on South Main Street, once again near Ciabras, and he just picked up the stone and he threw it, and it broke. And I've got the magnifying glass, which I'll put these on the table if you want for afterwards, because you're gonna have a really hard time seeing this unless you have the, but this is a piece, when the rock split, it's a piece of a fern in there, and it's like 300 million years old. So that's my little history of Attleboro.
Well, I don't have any visuals. I need this as a cheat sheet. So I can't. Yeah. So I was going to bring my deed for a square inch of the Yukon that I got in a cereal box years ago. Went back and read the notice for tonight and realized, oh, it's Attleboro. It isn't just any old thing. So I went through my files as quickly as I could, and I found Volume 1, Edition 1 of the Attleboro Historical Preservation Society's newsletter. So, so this was February of 2000. And I would never remember this, but from reading this, apparently our first meeting was in May of 1999. I wasn't there at the first meeting, but I think I was there at the third meeting. And so what they do is they're announcing who the officers are and the different directors. And then it talks about the Academy building. We weren't the only ones who were trying to get the Academy building. There was another group, and in here it says they were worried that there might be 2 other groups, so there might have been 4 groups looking for the Academy building. And so anyways, we were persistent apparently and got it. And then the fact that we became a tax-exempt group, Ted Moxham. So he was going to be the program for that night in, what is it, February? Yeah, February of 2000. So it would have been then and now type of program. And then a bio for Frank Monty, who was the president of the group at the time. So I'll be glad to give this to the group if you want one, if you don't have it. Yeah, okay. I think Ellen Parker was the editor for a while, and those of you that are new, you've probably just gotten the emails. I think we gave up with these a good, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago now.
Money, it costs money.
Yeah, it took a lot of money to mail them out. And by the way, I found a lot of other copies. I kept a lot of the originals. Do you also have them? Oh, all right, okay, so they're not all that important. But it takes, for any of you that have done any of this, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to put out a newsletter. And like Evelyn mentioned, it's expensive too. It's a good $1 a mailing, so, yep. All right, so that's it for me.
This is a sampler that I found on eBay probably 7 or 8 years ago. That's my wife's, I don't want to say downfall, her passion is antique samplers. This was the paper that was advertised on eBay it was made by a girl from Attleboro. And the paper we have, small paper, if we can throw it up there. Her name was Nancy Cushman, and it said she was born in 1803, and this was made in 1817. Now, our interim minister that was at our church went to Ancestry.com and found the whole shoot match of where she was born and where she lived, how she was married and this and that. We tore our house apart, we couldn't find all the paperwork, so. But this is the sampler, and is what she wrote here is a poem about how fair is the rose. And that's from Attleboro, made in 1817.
Introduce yourself.
Rob Krauth, and my wife Linda.
Very nice.
Does she need any introduction?
Marion Wrightington.
What's your name?
You're funny. I have a little thing that was given to me. It was 51 years ago that I moved into my house on North Ave. And at the time, the people that were selling it to me said, "We found something in the house, but we're going to keep it." So I was like, okay. And I didn't question them about what it was or anything. But here we go, you know, about maybe 45 years later, the lady's husband had died and she was downsizing. And so she called me up, and by then she knew what the house meant to me and, you know, how we keep it up and everything. So she said, "I want to give you what we found in the house." So she came over and she brought this little wooden box, and it's got little dovetail corners on it, and it's got a sliding cover. And inside were 4 little things. And one was this GAR attendance medal. Now, does everybody know what the GAR is? Grand Army of the Republic, and it was the group of men that had been in the Civil War that missed the camaraderie around the campfires after the war was over. So they started the Grand Army of the Republic so they could still have meetings. They still wore their uniforms. Here in Attleboro, we had our own chapter. It was the William Streeter, post number 145, the Grand Army of the Republic, and here is a picture of the men in their uniforms, and they all had hats on. So one of the things that was in the box, besides the attendance badge, was this other medal. They had medals that they presented to each other for different things. And then there was also this hat cord and this hat badge. So I went to a yard sale. You all know I love yard sales. And I bought this old felt hat. It was beige, but I spray painted it black so it looks like it's real old. And I put the hat cord on it, and I put the hat badge on it, and I leave it sitting on my butter churn right at the back door so it looks like he just came in from a meeting. So then I really wanted to find out who he was. So I did some research, and I found out that Frank Capron, who was born in 1845, my house was lived in by 200 years of Caprons. So he enlisted in the Civil War in August of 1862, mustered into service September of 1862 to the 40th Regiment Massachusetts Volunteers Company H. He was wounded May 16, 1864, discharged in 1865 from a disability caused by a wound in his knee. And then I went to City Hall and I found out he died in 1889, and then I looked at the cemetery records and I found out he was buried in Woodlawn. So I think this must have been the Capron that the badges belong to.
Marion, tell how old your house is. When did
It was the first house to go on the National Register back in 1978, and at that time Mass Historical said that they were sure that it was at least as old as 1740, but they thought it was probably a little bit older, but they didn't want to be written down as that or whatever. And since that time, I have found out that Banfield Capron, who was the first Capron that came to America, he got married for the 3rd time in 1735, and his son, who we felt built the house, got married for the 2nd time in 1735. So I think it was probably 1735 because we have a bake oven on the 1st floor and on the 2nd floor, and I think that was an in-law apartment for old Banfield when they got married because he was in his 70s when he got married the 3rd time. So that would make sense. The GAR had a lot of different buildings in Attleboro. They were down on County Street first, right, Rachel? The Murray Church took the building over after the GAR, or which was first? Yeah, the GAR post was actually, there's a rock there to commemorate where the GAR post was. It was on the corner of Mill Street and South Main Street, right in the Attleboro Sun parking lot. But that was where one post was, but then they had these other buildings too. Like I said, I think they probably kept getting smaller, unlike a lot of organizations that got bigger, because it was only the men who had been in the Civil War, so eventually they all started to die off, and that's why we have no more GAR. But anyway, so that was a good connection to Attleboro.
Hi, I'm Rachel Killian. Marion received an anonymous donation of pictures, and so I was trying to scan them in, and a lot of them had names on them, a lot of them didn't. But this was a group of women that we found in there that didn't have any documentation, so this is one of our mysteries we're hoping people might help us with. It's a little hard to see on here, but their aprons have W's on them, And so at first we thought they might be nurses, then we thought it might be a women's auxiliary group. Someone said they look like waitresses. Wegmans, am I saying that? Whiteman's got brought up. Does this uniform look familiar to anybody? It looked a little too nice for a waitress uniform, but again, people used to dress a lot nicer in the day. They've got button-up boots on and hats. No?
Do you know about what year that was?
We do not. A lot of the pictures seem to be from the 1920s, 19-teens. So we were hoping maybe you could help us with our mystery. Maybe someone that sees it might be able to help us with the mystery.
Like a very formal session.
We were hoping that the uniform might stand out to someone or they might recognize a person.
Can you tell if it's a full bonnet hat? Or if
It's it's like a visor. Yeah. All right, and then my next mystery. This one had written on it the Attleboro Health Camp. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Where the health camp was? Oh, Betty.
If I'm correct, across from Telequeca Park or down there in Briggs Corner, there was a health camp. It was a TB health camp. And I know about it because my mother often told me about her sister was at the health camp.
TB hospital was there.
Yes, and the TB hospital was where Telequeca. So that's all I know of.
Briggs's Corner.
Okay. All right. And then I think I had one more.
You got two. You got
Two.
the Buster.
Oh. So I maintain the Facebook page for the Historical Society, and I got a message from a man in England who had bought a Corvair, and it had a Buster Crawford. How do you say his name? Crawford. Crawford. Sticker in the door, and he was told with the documentation that this Corvair might have been in the window. So this is Pleasant Street, where the subway is now, is where Buster Crawford's shop was, his Chevy dealership. Somewhere around 1968, 69, it gets bought out by Hines and Stone, so that's what the next picture is.
This is Hines and Stone.
Yep. I'm not a car expert, but that's not a Corvair in the picture there. So I didn't know if anybody had remembered a Corvair being in the dealership on Pleasant Street, that we might help this guy out. He bought the car and had it shipped over to England, and now he's got a little piece of Attleboro over in England. A Chevy Corvair. Does that sound familiar to anybody? John? No? Oh, Joe?
Well, Buster Crawford was a Chevy dealership,
Yep.
and Bud Hines was a salesman, and he either bought or whatever, and he did it under the Hines or Hines and Stone. But yeah, it was definitely a Chevy dealership.
And you remember a Corvair being in the front window on display ever? No? Okay.
Corvair is a Chevy.
All right. All right, those were some of my Attleboro mysteries that I had. I was hoping maybe someone will think of something, or maybe someone will see something and help us out with one of those pictures.
So, when I was about 9 years old, my pediatrician was Dr. Robert Keeler. So, I remember this perfectly in my mind. I walked into his office and his nurse was Gert Gotting, and she would bring me in, and he would never look up. He'd grab my arm. I know who this is. And he says, "You're still drinking whole milk, are you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "You better stop." So about 2 years ago, I got a call here at the museum, and he says, "You don't know who this is, but I know who you are." And I said, "I have caller ID, Dr. Keeler. I know who you are." And he says, "Carlton, I have something I want to give to the museum." He said, "Since I retired to the Cape, I've been writing an old man's new biography, or the Keelers of Attleboro." So it's 378 pages of photos and the history of his great-grandfather and grandfather and father and his life, and it is just amazing. He made me promise not to show any of the pictures of him or the wife in public. He said, "I don't mind if people come in and look at it, but I can't let you do that. I don't think we've aged well." Well, he's aged great. He's 95 years old, and his wife, they look wonderful. he and his oldest son, Wayne, came in around, I think, right after Thanksgiving in 2015, and they brought this book. And so we have one copy. You're welcome to come in and check it over. The library has one copy in the local history section. It is amazing, and I've read bits and pieces of it, and it was just I had pneumonia once, and I would not sit still for my mother, and I hear a knock on the door about 10:30 in the morning, and he comes to the door. My mother lets him in. He goes, sit on the couch. I sat on the couch, and he said, listen, your mother needs you to behave or you'll never get rid of this pneumonia. I said, yes, sir. And he wasn't a mean guy, but he got stern with me. My mother thanked him, and I was healthy again in a week because I sat down and followed his directions. He was a great guy. I knew his son, unfortunately, who passed away, and I spent some great times at the house and with the family, and he hasn't changed at all, and hopefully I asked him, would you come up and talk a little bit to us? And he said, no, I don't do that anymore. He said, the voice is weak, I'm older, I don't, he says, I got a few health problems here and there. He said, so I stay on the Cape unless my son picks me up and brings me, so. An Old Man's New Biography, or the Keelers, 1880 to 1890, or 1987. And his family ran McCrae Keeler, which was right here on the corner of Wall and Union Street. It was a jewelry company. His father started it, and then his family carried on. McCrae died, and Pittman, who was his head, I think, tool maker, bought into it, so it was Pittman Keeler for a while. And then I think it went out of business eventually in 1954. And it was right here in the jewelry area of Attleboro. So that's my memory. He is and still one of the, truly heroes in my life, because he made me healthy. And I said, I'm still going strong. And I said, I still have an arm that you'd remember, I think. So that's what I have to say.
Well, a lot of people were not aware that there was Hebron Heights, section of Attleboro, just over the bridge after you go by Finberg School. It was at Hebronville School before the Finberg, and there was a fire department, and then the railroad tracks. Then they raised the bridge over the tracks. The train used to come and stop. You could get the train to go to Providence down on the ground level. And I was young then. Of course, that was 95 years ago. And so my grandfather had a very interesting life. His father died. He was one of 9 children. And he was next to the youngest. So his mother moved to be near her oldest married daughter and the edge of Attleboro, near Seekonk. And my grandfather went to work in the mill when he was 9 years old, and he always worked and earned and saved. And he ended up saving and investing in property. Now, Hebron Heights was nothing. It was all garden land, and there was another railroad track going to Pawtucket and Seekonk, land he owned for miles. The baseball field in Hebronville was his property. And so he was quite a horticultural. He grew everything beautifully, acres and acres, but gladiolas, I can't give you, it's a story, it's work year round. The garden club can tell you a lot more than I can now, because I was a young kid when we had to work there. Of course, most of this had
died with the World War II, the young men all went away to work. They were working in the gardens before. And you have to do so much. You have to keep and separate all these by name, by color. You have to have crates for everything. My grandfather built those. You get the bulbs, they have an insect that just kills them. You have to destroy that before this, you can plant them. They've got to be soaked in the fall. You dig them up out of the dirt and ground, and then you've got to dry them out in the sun, because you can't have them rot if you take them in. And after you get them in, you've got to clean them. So all winter, you clean the darn bulbs, and you have to clean, take the old roots off. They're dried out by the time you dry them. And he had to have stoves burning wood to heat these in the buildings he had, outbuildings that he had, and he had a workshop where he built these 2.5 inch by 2.5 feet by 4 feet, these crates to spread them in and store them rack by rack all winter, everywhere. His sheds, his basement, he had a 7-room duplex. And so one side was for just cleaning the bulbs in the winter, all winter. And I think you had to keep a wood stove going, and because you couldn't let them freeze and rot. It was work all year. They were beautiful in the spring, and there was a lot of work to do to prepare the land. And you had to rotate your crops. You couldn't use the same land very often. You had to keep changing. And so eventually they ended up having to rent other people's property to continue. And he would, of course, then when you dug up your bulbs, they would then plant what you would put in your garden to fertilize your soil. And that would be for the winter. And it was just work all the time, and it was very bad for your lungs. Unfortunately, the war, everything went abruptly. That was it. My father could not do everything.
What did he do with all those gladiolas? Did he sell them commercially?
Just about. Because there were 5, my father and mother had 5 daughters, no sons. My grandfather wanted grandsons, didn't get them. And, but we all had to work, everybody did. And my mother went to work to make money somewhere else. So it was hard. Pauline was young, and she didn't want to get involved in this because, but you were there, and she was only a little. My grandfather was born in 1869, and so anyway, after he was doing well with his business, he passed it on to my father, and he started his collection. He found so many Indian artifacts working in the soil that he ended up with 7 rooms of Indian, and he retired, worked, and made the frames, and wired all these arrowheads, sit night after night and do that. His rooms were all covered, his 7 rooms upstairs and down with those Indian artifacts. He died, I've got pictures. The bulbs that bloom, and of course my father had no interest in the collection or anything else. The gladiolas, he was glad he was able to retire and go to Florida. So This was my grandfather in his Indian regalia. He had everything. The library gave me this picture.
Was he of Indian descent?
No,
No?
no.
Just like
Yeah, he just loved it.
yes.
So I've got pictures of his collection. There they are. My assistant didn't want to be here.
Well,
So if anybody would like to know more about the Gladiola Gardens, there's more written. In fact, when Grover Cleveland was president of the United States, he declared Frank Fronier the king of the Gladiolas of the USA. Quite an honor. And that was it.
What was your grandfather's name?
Fronier, Frenier. Yeah. So that's the name we went through until we got married. So we're all got different names.
Very good.
Yeah, yeah. So anybody wants to read it, his history, and there's pictures, they're legitimate.
Pauline should
He had my,
not me.
all right, and this is what he ended up with each year, was a reunion with on his farm. He just loved, the Hamels are in there. Yeah, her in-laws, yeah. There were that many people. Pauline was little in this one, too.
She's a young one, huh?
So, yeah, there were a lot of people in those days, a lot of cousins. You'd get together every year, you know. But he retired in 1930, and he made so much and invested so much in these Indian artifacts. It was, the whole thing just died, and the one man that bought the property reaped the whole reward. My father gave us nothing. But what would we do with it? So it's put to good use, I hope. Yes. But if anybody, but year-round, it was work, year-round. Yeah. Anything pretty, they were.
So cute, all the girls working in the field.
Oh, yeah, that was when they had one of the family reunions. Pauline's in the middle, the first one.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Fred Wall. I've lived in Attleboro all my life, and I'm in the top row, middle shot here, taken in Briggs School. And I was sharing with a few people that my grade 2 Briggs Corner School, it looks just like that today.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I enjoyed the fourth grade there, particularly with Irene Campbell, and something of big interest was my second and third grade teacher was Margaret Fawcett, and in 1923 or 4, my dad was there, and he had Margaret Fawcett for a teacher. It's amazing how you can remember the first grade teacher, Elsie Bowen, Margaret Fawcett, Irene Campbell for 4th and 5th grade. And as I look at the picture today, I can identify most everyone in it. It's amazing how when you're 9 or 10 years old, not an awful lot of facial features change. Moving on from Briggs School, a lot of the students, joined with other grade schools as well. And then I had the opportunity, through my mother's interest, and meeting for a period of time A. Irving Studley. And Studley School was a school named after him. He was a retired educator at the time. When I went to Bliss School, a principal there, Paul Whitten, and my parents were well acquainted with him after he retired. I was a personal friend of Bob Coelho over the years, school named after him. eliminating this as a project, I want to reflect on Buster Crawford. I knew him. I met him probably in the early 70s. He did start the Chevrolet dealership, but one highlight was that in 1947, the high school was interested in providing automobile educational classes for the high school students. And Buster donated a car from his collection, 1947 Chevy. And he was a member of the Attleboro Rotary Club, 1935, as a charter member as well. Unfortunately, as I look at this photo, a number of my fourth grade classmates there are no longer with us. And, but it was a great reflection, and in viewing some of these old photos from the Briggs Corner School. Thank you.
I'd like to add something to that. In the mail one day, I got a package, and in the package were about 25 school pictures, and they were, in fact, Fred has the envelope. This teacher, Mrs. Campbell, who taught at the Briggs Corner School for years and years and years, and then she went to Washington School, and so it's interesting to look on the back. The names of all the students were there, the people who were absent. So the good old days, you can go back and look, and other classmates that were at Briggs Corner were like Jane Devaney, the Atmars. They weren't going to private schools, they were going to public schools. So thank you very much.
My name's Gary Demers. I just thought I'd grab a couple of trinkets from my collection just to share some memories. We got a spindle, which was a shuttle, which has a spindle in it. This is the thread that creates our fabrics today, like sheets and stuff. So this shoots through the loom, back and forth. It shuttles through, back and forth, and every time it does, it leaves a thread. So when you see your sheet sets that say 600 count thread, it's 600 of these, all at the same time creating a sheet of fabric. And these are what Dodgeville Mill created, is the spindles. So in its heyday, it had 419,000 spindles being made, and that was very impressive. So that's why it was a very logical target for the BB&R Knight empire, who was at the time growing very prominent in Rhode Island and buying up mills. They bought up the Dodgeville Mill for the spindles to feed their looms. So this is a shuttle, and this is the spindle, and they have to constantly go back and forth and replace these on the shuttles as the looms created the fabric at a very high pace. This little artifact, I have no idea what it is, but I was wondering if anybody else did. This came out of Atherton's Furniture's attic. So I thought, a little odd thing. Maybe somebody knows what it is. So there's your mystery, like Rachel. I have a mystery. And it seems that it would tighten something. So I thought, furniture store, maybe it tightens springs or tighten some cords and for something to be worked on. So if anybody knows what that is.
The headboard and the footboard together, so they can display them.
There you go. It holds the headboard and the footboard together so they can display them. In a short distance, right together, correct? So this drops into the cross rail slots, and then they tighten it. Wonderful. Now I know what it is. We all do. This little artifact is just a fire exit sign, but a fire extinguisher sign. All this worked for a fire extinguisher, and this came out of the Swank building. Swank's, which is now gone, has been demolished. I had the luxury of going through there before they demolished it and seeing if there was anything there of interest. There wasn't very much. It was pretty empty. There really wasn't a lot of architecture. It was a standard run-of-the-mill type building, brick construction. But this was hanging on a post, and I said, look at the work in just a sign. I mean, today we'll buy a sign and, you know, slap it up with a couple of screws. Somebody had to paint this, cut it, hang it, and I thought he was a pretty good artist, pretty good hand script. That's my memorabilia from Swank, other than the jewelry we have. I have a community directory from 1954. And, of course, everybody was in here, good or bad. It had credit references. If you were behind on your credit and they caught wind of it, they published it. So you could not hide. So this has, and I mean, these are just such a wealth of information of all of the businesses and in the day that were, you know, everyday businesses. And this is where all of the donations for the community would come from, all these businesses and all these citizens patronizing the businesses. And today, it would be a lot thinner. So I thought this was really interesting. My company is in here, Demers Brothers, and at that time, my grandfather and my great uncle owned it. And it has a, it had a little tag in it, and I found it interesting. I gotta put my glasses on. And I love the script in the old days. I mean, look at the handwriting, huh? If they could teach that today. So as it says, R.L. Polk called, Dorothy available. The book is available for the directory. Oh yes, that's better. The directory is available for the Attleboro, North Attleboro, and Plainville area for $40. That seemed really expensive to me for those days. If interested, call Hancock and look at the exchanges, 66309. Yeah. Go figure, they run out of these numbers. So it's just really a great wealth of information for businesses of the day, and it's always interesting to see the old names of companies. What's that? What year is that? 1954. So it's just great to, I'm sorry, 1952. Somebody was nice enough to date it. Who owned the businesses, and where their address were, where they lived, bad credit. And it really stimulates a lot of great memories to look through one of these, because we used all these stores. We walked by them, we went through them. You know, there's some great memories just looking through them. Here was mine. My family's business is right on the front, and thank God we still don't move pianos. Got out of that, thank God. So just to share some other memories of the spearheads that Barbara had found in her backyard on South Main Street. I had read in my readings about the mill is that the Indians fought over who was going to get the fishing rights on the 10-mile river at Dodgeville, because it's a downward slope, and that's why they put the mill there. And in those days of the Indians, they were fighting over who was going to get the rights to fish in that. Of course, the fish would jump upstream in those days, and who would fight over that? And I had a question, Mrs. Fournier. Where did all the boards go with all the Indian artifacts? Maybe the Bronson Museum? We had our great... Wow. Well, maybe it is in the Bronson collection. That's pretty significant. This area is huge in Indian history. Our area is significant in the Indian history and tool making, and that's why there's so much to be found if in sites that have not been so modernized. But for the most part, this area is incredible. Just on the Indian artifacts that we are so well known for, it's because the red felt site that is native to North Attleboro area is so conducive to making tools. It's the right type of stone to be chipped, and they can create tools very, very easily. So we were in a place that was able to make tools for the Indian tribes. So that's why we have so many artifacts, is because it was coming from just this little place where this red felt site is, and it was like a gathering place for Indians to do that. I had another thing that I had put out before when everybody was coming in about TI's waste treatment plant. And of course, the waste treatment from TI was really, nothing more than all of their water waste coming off of the machinery, and being processed. But it starts off reading, Texas Instruments $9 million industrial wastewater treatment is one of the most sophisticated in the country. Another great for Attleboro. This was 1988. 88. And they spent $9 million creating it. Wow. Right? And so it was brought up to its height in 88 in its opening, and now it's gone. So it's another thing that's come and gone. Is one of the leading things in the country, and it's gone. So like Attleboro has so many biggest things in the country and the world, dye factories. The Wolfenden factory was the largest dye factory in the country, in the world. Balfour, Attleboro has some huge, great, largest in the country, largest in the world things, and they're all in our history. So we just have to dig a little deeper into the business directory to see some of those, but great history. And
The beginning and the end. I have a book here, and it's from the 1880s, and it's the certificates of married women doing business on separate accounts. And I'm going to ask, the Massachusetts state laws required women to record when they went into business. And one of the records in that book that's falling apart, but it's treasured most of the time, there's one that says, I, Laura Mackey of Attleboro, in the county of Bristol and Commonwealth of Massachusetts, proposing to do business on my own separate account, do hereby certify that the name of my husband is George Mackey, that the nature of the business proposed to be done by me is that of a physician, that the place where I propose to do business is in Wetherell's Building, so-called, at 28 South Main Street, in the village of Attleboro, in said Attleboro, in witness whereof I have set my hand and seal this 9th day of March, 1883, and it's signed by the town clerk, all right? And I have one little notice too. Although women had been training to be doctors for a few decades, they were repeatedly denied membership in the Massachusetts Medical Society until 1884. So she was one of the first, and she was from Attleboro. Thank you.
This is sort of a follow-up to Rachel's mysteries. In my postcard gathering, I came across the Killam and Hopkins architects' plans for the Memorial City Hall in Attleboro on North Main Street. If you look to the right, that's the Attleboro Library. So this would have been in the parking lot next to the library. And I can't find out any information on it as far as when it was done, or how, or who, or how far along the plans got, whether it was just a artist's drawing or whether there was anything actually done further along with it. So that's the mystery. There's nothing on the back at all. It's Killam and Hopkins Architects, 9 Park Street, Boston. And up on the top, it's a Memorial City Hall for Attleboro, North Main Street site. And down at the bottom, it says proposed Memorial City Hall. So if anybody knows anything about it, that's the library next to it on the right. So that's the mystery for tonight. Good.
The October program, we are going to be going to the Attleboro Falls, in the Falls, the Falls Barn Museum, and there are many of the Native American artifacts there, so we'll be able to see those. And while I'm just talking about the museum, there's so much we did when we were first, a a society. We did make a trip up to the Falls Museum, the Falls Barn, and it has been reorganized, and it is amazing. Evelyn and I, and Rachel, I think, also went up there to preview it for our program. So make sure you come to that October meeting.